Hello, everyone. This is Shannon Waller here, and welcome to the Team Success Podcast. Today, we're going to talk about something that I think has a huge impact on communication and teamwork, but it's something that we can be fairly oblivious to, and that is pace. I'm talking about the pace at which we think, the pace at which we talk in particular, the pace at which we do things. And what's really interesting about pace is that some of us are naturally faster paced and some of us are more even paced. And if you actually want to get an assessment of this, I highly, highly recommend doing the DISC profile. There are lots of organizations that offer the DISC profile. It's actually something that's out in the public domain. And it's based on the work of William Marston, who in 1928 wrote a great book called The Emotions of Normal People. I love that title, by the way. And what he noticed was that there were several characteristics. And I'm really only going to focus on two of the four today. But one of the things he really noticed was that some people were fast-paced and very verbal, while other people, in contrast, were much more even-paced and reserved. So that's really the dynamic that I'm going to talk about today. If you're familiar with DISC, then the D and I for dominant and influencing are the fast-paced, and the steadfast and cautious are the reserved and more even-paced. So I've been giving this a lot of thought because I've had some experiences over the course of my career that have really meant that this was an important thing for me to pay attention to. And I want to relate one of the experiences that I learned fairly early in my days at Strategic Coach. So when I started at Strategic Coach in 1991, I did sales for about the first three and a half years before I got into design and coaching. And one of the things that happened in that first few years is that we started coaching in the U.S. and we started attracting more American clients. Now, in case you don't know, I live in Toronto and I'm Canadian by birth, although I spent a lot of time in the U.S., which I love. But when I was first selling to Americans, I didn't know that many, hadn't traveled extensively in the U.S., and if you haven't noticed, there is a different pace between the two countries. So one of my very first phone calls to Americans went something like this from the best of my memory. So I basically called up and I said, here to talk about Strategic Coach. He said, "What's the program? What can I get out of it?" And I was like, this was very dramatic to my little soft-spoken Canadian. I said, "You can make a lot more money in a lot less time." He goes, "Great, tell me more." And off we went. Now, thankfully, in my intuitive moment, what I figured out how to do was to respond in kind to his pace and how he talked. If you know DISC, you know he was a D for dominant and direct. But that was a big thing for me to adapt to. So it was interesting because when I learned that it wasn't meant as an offense, it was not meant as an attack, even though to my then soft-spoken way of communicating, it was like, it was a bit abrupt. I figured it out. And we actually went on to have a great conversation, which I really appreciate. That was a huge learning experience for me. Now, I have since learned that I am naturally a fast-paced person. So now it's actually a little bit more normal for me to be talking to people who are fast-paced. And a lot of entrepreneurs are, by nature and by definition, very fast-paced people. They like things to happen quickly. They're excellent at articulating what they want to accomplish. They're good at inspiring other people to action. They are direct, they can be demanding, and they are decisive. Now, that describes a lot of Strategic Coach clients and a lot of the entrepreneurs I run into. Not everyone. I do not want to paint everyone with the same brush. But if you're an even-tempered person working with someone who is really fast-paced and verbal, it can be kind of shocking. It can come across as abrupt. It can come across as even attacking. It can come across as, someone's on the offense, and you can very quickly want to play defense with that. However, the trick here is not to take it personally, but rather to go and match that other person's pace, to actually step into their world, like I somehow figured out how to do on that one phone call, and you pick up your pace, and then you can have a really great conversation. I think this is a gift for people who are really good communicators. They have the gift of automatically adjusting their pace. And for people for whom it's not a natural gift, this is something that is very easily learned once you know what to pay attention to. There are the fast talkers, there are the slower talkers, and you have to adapt your pace. Now, as someone who is naturally fast-paced and who talks quickly, because I'm constantly being coached by my team to slow down, Shannon, one of the things for me is to really kind of take a deep breath, practice how to enunciate, and slow my pace so that everyone can absorb what I'm saying. And I have a deep appreciation for people who are even-paced. They are not me. But for us to have really great communication, I need to take a few deep breaths. I need to slow down. I need to be very intentional about what I want to say and the points I want to get across. And one of the things I appreciate about people who are that even-paced and more reserved is that they want to absorb everything I'm saying. They want to take it all in. They want to really appreciate every aspect of it. And if I'm whipping 18 ideas at them in 2 minutes, they're going to miss something. So the rapid fire approach doesn't work with everybody. Now, the more aware I am and the more I'm paying attention, then I can adapt. But if I'm not, which if I'm in a hurry, I'm not as adaptable, things go wrong. Miscommunications happen, misunderstandings happen, things don't happen the way I think they're supposed to or going to. But I realize it's really up to me to make that adaptation, to really make that shift. So a couple of other examples that I thought you would appreciate. So one of the people that I work with, when we were talking about this particular talk, she was saying that when she goes and works with certain other team members in the company who are phenomenal writers, they are so, so good. She takes a few deep breaths as she's walking to their offices. Just slow down. Because she works in an environment where there are a lot of very fast-paced people. So her own milieu, her own team is very fast-paced compared to the people she's talking to. So when she goes to talk to the more even-paced people, she takes a few deep breaths, slows down, and paces it out very calmly, much more methodically. Now, the same is also true when she goes and talks with Babs, who is the co-owner of Strategic Coach. She picks up the pace. She's quick, she's definitive, she has a couple key points and keeps the conversation on pace like this. And that conversation matches Babs's pace. So regardless of where you are, you're going to find people who are faster and people who are more even. And the more adept you are at recognizing that and adapting to that, the easier it will be. Now, having said that, I don't want you to always be adapting. If you are spending time, if you're an even-paced person and you're always spending time around people who talk 1,000,000 miles an hour, you're going to be exhausted. You'll probably get a headache. You need to find some like-minded friends to hang out with who are just calm and peaceful and can let you be and who are not going to throw a million things at you at one time. That's going to make you feel great. And if you're a fast-paced person and you are constantly kind of taking a deep breath to really breathe deeply, then you're going to want to find some people with whom you can have those rapid-fire conversations. They're fun. They're like playtime. You can just boop, 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 boop. And this is also actually where Kolbe comes in too, for those of you that are familiar with the Kolbe profile. Kolbe is fantastic because you can identify people who are, if you're like me, a quick start. I remember one conversation with my friend Catherine and a really good friend of hers, Perry, and she just literally watched the two of us play the fastest game of verbal tennis she had ever seen. We would have one idea, I'd whip an adaptation of it to him, he would whip something back to me, and she said it was like watching a super fast tennis rally. We just batted around 1,000,000 ideas in a very short period of time, and it was energizing and fun for both of us. I can't actually remember a single thing we talked about, but I remember thinking it was really a good time at the moment. So finding people with whom you naturally are the same pace is very restful and rejuvenating for people who are even-paced and stimulating and exciting for people who are fast-paced. But it means that you don't have to adapt. You don't have to change. You can just be you. However, that's not everyone. And the more astute and aware you are of how other people are responding and how they naturally work, the more successful you'll be in your communication and in your teamwork. And again, one of the reasons why I thought this was so important is because this is one of the major problems I see. I talk to entrepreneurs all the time who are so frustrated with their team. And I look at their team and they've got the right capabilities, they've got the right skills, they've got the right instincts for the role. But what they are missing on is they have a different pace. And then I've talked to a ton of team members who get incredibly frustrated and challenged by the fact that their entrepreneur is moving really, really fast. And I want to say, stop expecting the other people to be different. It's much easier to change how we communicate to someone than it is on how we receive information. And this is something we talk about in the Communication Builder. And if you want to see that exercise, please go to the teamsuccesshandbook.com and you can download an exercise for that. And one of the things we talk about there is how do you like to give and receive information? So when you are paying attention, and you'll know this by tone of voice, by how quickly someone speaks, by how systematically they go through things or how sporadically they go through things, you will, if you are paying attention, be able to figure out how that person needs to receive what it is that you're saying. If you're not paying attention, you assume everyone's like you. Well, first of all, no offense, but you'll be wrong. And more importantly, you won't actually get the results you want. You'll get the results you think you're going to get, but frankly, it won't happen. There'll be a miss. There'll be a drop. Someone will not have received it the way that you intended it. Because you were talking so quickly, you may not have realized that they needed to ask questions. Because you were talking so slowly, you may not have realized that someone tuned out, stopped paying attention to you a long time ago. That also happens. So really, it's having that awareness. It's listening really, really closely to what someone says, what they don't say. Pay attention to the nuances. Really absorb how they're saying something. And this means you have to be rested and tuned in enough to pay attention to someone else as opposed to what's going on with you. Now, here's the deal about this. When we're tired, when we're stressed, when we're frantic, we're not very good about paying attention to how other people are doing things. We are focused on our own reality and our own issues. So part of the thing I want you to realize is that to be really good at this, you have to be calm within yourself. I don't care how fast or not a paced person you are. It means that you have to settle yourself before we can really pay attention to someone else. I think that's true in many areas of life, not just when we're talking about teamwork in business. And that's the last thing I want to talk about with regard to pace. Pay attention to this and practice with not only your coworkers, not only your entrepreneur, not only your team or your team leaders, but also with your family and with your friends. So pay attention to your relatives. I just learned, for example, that my daughter is really even-paced. When I did her disc, she's all SC, all supportive, cautious. And even though I've known her since before she was born, I didn't actually realize that. Partly because I'm all fast-paced, and she seems to be able to keep up with me, and she is a very adaptable person. But all of a sudden I realized, oops, I need to slow it down. I need to chill out a little bit when I'm talking to my eldest daughter. So that was a really interesting insight for me. And I really appreciated having that external coaching tool, the DISC profile, to validate that for me. And it told me why she doesn't like certain things, like being the center of attention, and why she likes certain friends who are very relaxed and, as she calls it, chilled out around her. All of a sudden, all of that made sense, whereas before I was like, really? Because she's otherwise seemed to be fairly adaptable. So one of the other things I've learned is that do not assume that you know. This is why I love other instruments and psychometric profiles, not tests, but profiles, because they help give you the language. They give you the context for being able to communicate better with other people. And that's ultimately what teamwork boils down to. It's really very effective, intentional, and wise communication. So pay attention to your pace. Pay attention to other people's pace. Be alert and conscientious enough to understand and pay attention to other people's pace and adapt to them. And you can also educate them that this is what you need back. You need them to keep pace with you. If you're able to have that conversation and you're adept and aware, you will have brilliant teamwork, brilliant communication, and get all the results you're looking for. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed this conversation about pace. And if you have any more questions, please email us at questions@strategiccoach.com. Thanks for listening. And as always, here's to your team's success.